I sat alone on Mother's Day, staring at the clock, wondering if anyone would knock on my door. Hours passed. My phone buzzed. Finally, I thought. But it wasn't what I expected. My daughter texted, "We're celebrating with real family." Moments later, her husband posted a picture of them smiling at a restaurant table, surrounded by people I didn't even know. My hands trembled as I looked at that screen. That night, I called my lawyer and had their names removed from the house deed they'd been counting on. The next morning, I woke to 76 missed calls. Before I continue, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? My name is Judith. I'm 71 years old, and this is the story of how Mother's Day broke my heart and how I finally broke free. The day had started like any other Mother's Day for me in recent years. Quiet, too quiet. I'd baked a small lemon cake the night before, just in case anyone decided to stop by. I set the table for 4, hoping against reason that my daughter, Emily, her husband David, and the grandchildren would surprise me. I placed a vase of tulips, my favorite flowers, in the center. The house smelled of fresh polish, lemon zest, and hope. By noon, the tulips looked brighter than I felt. I kept glancing out the window, every passing car making my heart leap, only to sink again when it drove past. I told myself maybe they were just running late. Maybe they'd planned a surprise. Around 2 o'clock, the doubt began to creep in. The cake sat untouched. My teacup went cold. I scrolled through my phone, staring at old pictures of Mother's Days past, me and Emily on the porch, me holding the grandkids when they were little, smiles wide, arms tight around me. I wondered where that family had gone. Then my phone buzzed. Relief rushed through me as I grabbed it. Finally, I thought. But it wasn't a call. It was a text. Just 7 words, but each one cut deeper than the last. We're celebrating with real family. Don't wait. I froze. My daughter, my only child, had just told me in so many words that I wasn't her real family. My throat closed up, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. I stared at that message over and over, hoping I'd read it wrong, but the words stayed the same, cruel and cold. Before I could even process it, a notification popped up on Facebook. David had posted a picture of them at a restaurant. Emily sat there in a bright red dress, smiling wide, holding a glass of wine. Around the table were his parents, his sister, cousins, all of them laughing, celebrating. My chair sat empty miles away. That was the moment something inside me snapped. My chest ached, but not from sadness this time. It was something harder, colder. For years, I'd convinced myself that maybe they were busy. Maybe life was just pulling them away. But no, this wasn't neglect. This was rejection. Public, deliberate rejection. I pushed the cake to the side and poured myself a glass of water, though what I really wanted was something stronger. I sat in my armchair, the one Robert used to love before he passed, and I thought about all I had given, all the sacrifices, all the checks, all the trust. And for what? A text telling me I wasn't real family. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. Instead, I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. My voice was calm, steady, like I'd been waiting for this moment my whole life. "James," I said, "it's time to make a change. I want Emily and David's names removed from the house deed immediately." The silence on the other end lasted a few seconds before James cleared his throat. "Are you sure, Judith?" "Never been more sure," I told him. I hung up the phone, set down my glass, and for the first time in years, I felt a strange peace, like I'd finally taken one small step toward reclaiming myself. But peace never lasts. The next morning, when I picked up my phone, the screen lit up with 76 missed calls. And that was only the beginning. When I saw those 76 missed calls, I didn't answer. I set the phone face down on the table and let the silence fill the room. My daughter could shout into the void all she wanted. Suddenly, I didn't feel the same urgency to pick up. Because the truth is, I'd already answered her calls for decades, not through words, but through actions. Through every check I wrote, Every bill I covered, every sacrifice I made so her life could be easier than mine ever was. I thought back to the first time I bailed her out. Emily was 24, freshly married to David, and they wanted to buy a house. They came to me with big eyes and soft voices, promising they'd pay me back someday. "Just a little help with the down payment, Mom," Emily had said, her hand resting on mine. I wrote a check for $200,000, no hesitation. Robert and I had worked our whole lives to save, and I wanted her to have the security we'd earned. Then there was the wedding itself. I paid for it all. The dress, the venue, the band, even the flowers. I remember Robert whispering to me as we watched Emily dance with David for the first time, "She'll never forget this, Judy. She'll always know how much you gave at the time." I believed him. I believed love worked that way. Give enough and it comes back to you. It didn't. Over the years, the list of my help grew longer than I care to admit. When David lost his job, I covered their mortgage for 6 months. When Emily went back to school for her master's degree, I paid her tuition. When they couldn't afford private school for their children, I quietly transferred the money each semester so Emma and Luke wouldn't have to leave their friends. Every Christmas, I bought not just gifts for the kids, but for David too, expensive ones he never thanked me for. I was their safety net, their invisible paycheck, their emergency fund. They didn't even hide it after a while. Emily would call me and say, "Mom, the credit card bill's a little high this month. Can you—" Or David would message me, "Car repairs are killing us. Any chance you could?" And of course, I always did. I thought that was what mothers were for. But the cost wasn't just money. It was dignity. It was love given freely and never returned. With every dollar I gave, a little more respect vanished. I became less of a mother and more of a machine, and I didn't notice it at first. I convinced myself I was helping, that this was normal, that one day they'd realize how much I'd done. But as I sat there, remembering it all, the house, the wedding, the tuition, the endless bills, I realized the truth. I had raised a daughter who didn't see me as family at all. The proof was in her message. We're celebrating with real family. The irony, of course, was that the real family she was dining with that night, the in-laws, the cousins, the people laughing over wine and steak, none of them had given her what I had. They hadn't paid her bills. They hadn't sacrificed their golden years to ensure her comfort. Yet they were her real family, and I was disposable. I stared at the tulips on my table, now drooping, their petals softening at the edges, just like me, wilted, overlooked, taken for granted. But that wasn't the end of it. Number. Because in that moment, as bitter as it tasted, I realized something else. I had one thing left they wanted. One thing that bound them to me, even as they pretended I wasn't real family. The house. The house Robert and I had built, loved and fought for. The house I'd let them put their names on for the future. As Emily had said. Well, the future had arrived, and so had my reckoning. They thought they could erase me with a text message, but I had the pen and the deed in my hands, and they were about to learn what it meant to underestimate me. I remember the day we added Emily and David's names to the house deed like it was yesterday. It was 3 years after Robert passed. I was lonely, grieving, and terrified of what the future might hold. Emily had come over with her sweetest voice, the one she saved for when she wanted something big. "Mom," she said, "this house should stay in the family forever, don't you think?" At first, I thought she meant well. She spoke of preserving memories, of keeping Robert's legacy alive. David chimed in about helping with the upkeep and planning for the future. They made it sound like love. But now, looking back, I realize it was nothing more than calculation. The lawyer, James, had looked at me over his glasses that day. "Judith, are you sure about this? Once their names are on the deed, it complicates matters." I remember brushing him off. "They're my family, James." Of course, I'm sure he sighed, made the changes, and slid the paperwork across the table. I signed without hesitation, blind with love and trust. but James had quietly inserted a safeguard at my request, the ability to remove their names if things ever turned sour. "Just in case," he'd said, and I had laughed at the time. That'll never happen. And yet, here I was. On Mother's Day night, after that cruel text, I pulled out the folder James had given me years ago. Inside were copies of the deed, neatly marked with signatures and dates. Robert's handwriting stared back at me from the older papers, strong and steady. Mine trembled slightly on the newer ones, the ink faded but still binding. And at the bottom, clear as day, Emily and David's names sat smugly beside mine. I felt anger rise in my chest like a fire. They thought this house was theirs. They thought they were entitled to it, that my home was just another prize to collect when I was gone. But entitlement is not inheritance, and betrayal is not family. The next morning, I called James. His voice was calm, measured as always. "Judith," he said, "I had a feeling you might call me one day." "I want them gone," I told him flatly. "From the deed?" "From my life," I said. "But the deed is where we start." There was a pause, then the shuffle of papers on his desk. "You have every right. We put those provisions in place for this very reason. I'll draw up the amendment today." I thanked him, my voice steady, though my hands trembled as I held the phone. When I hung up, I sat back in my chair and exhaled for what felt like the first time in years. That night, I walked through each room of the house slowly, touching the walls, the furniture, the photographs that still lined the shelves, Robert's chair in the corner, the family portraits from happier times, the kitchen where Emily once helped me bake cookies as a child. "This is mine," I whispered to myself. "Not theirs. Mine." It wasn't greed or spite. It was justice. The house was never about bricks or property value. It was about love, memory, and the life I had built with Robert. They didn't respect me enough to even wish me a happy Mother's Day. Why should they inherit the very walls that held my tears, my laughter, my heart? The decision was final. Emily and David were erased from the deed before sunrise. I slept soundly for the first time in months, but my peace was short-lived, because when morning came, I woke not just to sunlight filtering through the curtains, but to 76 missed calls and a storm that was about to break my door wide open. The morning after I had Emily and David's names removed from the deed, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. 76 missed calls, dozens of frantic messages. My screen lit up like a Christmas tree. Some were from Emily, some from David, and a few even from numbers I didn't recognize, which I assumed were his side of the family. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I made myself a pot of tea, buttered a piece of toast, and sat in Robert's old armchair. The sunlight was soft through the curtains, and for the first time in years, I felt calm. Their panic was none of my concern anymore. Let them squirm. Every message they left followed the same pathetic pattern. The first one sounded confused. "Mom, something must be wrong with the deed records." "Call me back." Then the tone shifted. "Why would you do this? We need to talk immediately." By the 20th voicemail, David's voice had turned sharp, laced with anger. "Judith, this isn't funny. Put our names back or you'll regret it." That last one made me laugh out loud. Regret? I'd lived in regret for years, regretting every check I'd written, every sacrifice I'd made, every time I swallowed my hurt to keep peace at the dinner table. Number. Not this time. I set my phone to silent and placed it in the drawer of my nightstand. Then I walked through the quiet house. The lemon cake from Mother's Day still sat on the counter, now stale and unappetizing. I tossed it into the bin with a sigh of finality. It felt symbolic, throwing away the years of waiting for them to care. All afternoon, I moved at my own pace. I tidied the living room, I ironed a blouse. I even sat down with a crossword puzzle I'd been meaning to finish. Every so often, I heard the faint buzz of the phone vibrating, but I didn't move toward it. You see, for years, I'd lived in a state of high alert. Emily would call, and I'd rush to answer. David would send a message and I'd scramble to find my checkbook. I'd trained myself to believe that their needs came before my own peace of mind. But that day, I reclaimed the silence. By evening, I poured myself a glass of white wine and sat on the porch. The air was cool, the tulips by the steps swaying gently. I thought of Robert and how often he'd warned me. "Judy," he used to say, "you give too much." One day, they'll forget the difference between kindness and obligation. He'd been right. The stars came out, and I stayed on that porch longer than I had in years. For once, the night didn't feel lonely. It felt liberating. Their voices might be shouting into voicemails and text messages, but I didn't hear them anymore. Still, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. People like Emily and David didn't walk away quietly. No, when entitlement is threatened, it claws back harder, and I didn't have to wait long to see just how ugly their claws could get. The very next morning, as I buttered a fresh slice of toast, a knock thundered at my door. The pounding on my door rattled the glass in its frame. At first, I considered ignoring it the way I had ignored their calls, but something in me wanted to see their faces. I wanted to look them in the eye after all those years of pretending we were still a family. I opened the door slowly, deliberately. There they were. Emily, my only daughter, and David, her ever-demanding husband. Emily's cheeks were flushed, her hair a mess like she'd been tugging at it in frustration. David stood stiffly beside her, jaw clenched, his fists tightening at his sides. He looked less like a son-in-law and more like a landlord come to collect rent. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Emily burst out before I could even greet them. Her voice was high-pitched, shaky with a mix of anger and panic. I leaned on the doorframe, calm as I'd ever been. "Good morning, dear. Would you like some coffee?" David pushed past me before I could finish, muttering, "We don't want coffee. We want answers." Emily followed, slamming the door behind her. They planted themselves in my living room like they owned the place. "Do you realize," David snapped, "the bank told us our names are no longer on the house deed. Our names, Judith. You can't just take us off like that." I walked past them quietly into the kitchen and set the kettle on the stove. My hands moved with deliberate calm, measuring coffee grounds, pouring water, stirring slowly. Let them stew while I brewed. Emily's voice cracked. "Mom, this house was supposed to be ours one day. You promised. How could you do this to us?" I turned to face her. "Promised? I gave you years of my life. I paid your bills. I kept your children in private school. I bought your house, for heaven's sake. And you tell me I'm not real family on Mother's Day? That text was your promise to me, Emily, a promise that I don't matter." Her face went pale. David, though, grew red with fury. "You're overreacting." It was a joke. She didn't mean it like that. I raised an eyebrow. "A joke? Tell me, David, what part of real family is funny? The part where you humiliated me publicly, or the part where you expected me to keep paying for the life you can't afford?" For once, David had no quick retort. Emily tried again, softer this time, her voice pleading. "Mom, we need that deed." "If the house isn't in our name, what happens to us? To the kids? We've built our lives around it." Her words might have tugged at me years ago, but not anymore. I sipped my coffee, unbothered. "Then perhaps it's time you learn to build your life around yourselves instead of me." Emily's lip trembled. "You'll regret this. You'll die alone, and when you do, you'll wish we were there." That one stung, but only for a moment. I set my cup down carefully and met her gaze. Better to die alone in peace than live surrounded by people who only want what's in my bank account. The room went silent. Emily blinked rapidly, her eyes glistening with something that looked like hurt, but I couldn't tell if it was real or just another performance. David's jaw worked as if he were chewing on words he couldn't spit out. Finally, I walked to the door and opened it wide. "You should go now. Think carefully about the kind of family you want to be, because this door won't open again for beggars." Emily let out a strangled sound, half cry, half growl, and stormed past me. David followed, but not before leaning close enough to whisper, "You'll regret this, Judith. You've started something you can't finish." I closed the door on his words, locked it, and leaned against the wood. My heart pounded, but my spirit had never felt steadier. Little did they know, I wasn't the one who couldn't finish what I'd started. They were. After that storm of a visit, the silence didn't last long. For 2 whole days, I didn't hear from them, and I almost thought they'd accepted my decision. Almost. On the 3rd day, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a bouquet of roses so large it blocked the delivery boy's face. I signed for it, set the flowers on my dining table, and read the card tucked into the arrangement. "Thinking of you, Mom. We love you always. Emily and David." I almost laughed. Never in my life had they sent me flowers. Not on my birthdays, not on Mother's Days, not even when Robert died. But suddenly, when the deed was gone, they had the money and the thoughtfulness for roses? Please. I left the flowers on the table, their fragrance filling the house like perfume masking rot. The next day, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was Emily's voice, sugary sweet, so unlike the angry daughter who'd stormed out of my house just days before. "Hi, Mom," she said, drawing out the words. "Just calling to see how you're feeling. I realize we don't check in on you enough, and I want to change that." Her tone was syrupy, dripping with artificial sweetness, like a child rehearsing lines for a school play. "I'm fine," I said evenly. "Thank you for asking." There was a pause before she rushed on. "That's wonderful. Maybe we could get lunch this week, just you and me. Like old times, old times. We'd never had regular lunches, just like she'd never called to check in unless she needed something." I could almost hear David feeding her lines in the background. Still, I played along. "That sounds lovely. Let me think about it." She hung up, satisfied, no doubt running back to David to report her progress. But it didn't end there. Later that afternoon, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Emma, my teenage granddaughter. Her voice was hesitant, stilted, like she was reading from a script. "Hi, Grandma, just wanted to call and tell you about my day at school," she chirped. Emma had never called me in her life, not once without her mother prompting her. I could almost see Emily standing behind her, nodding, mouthing the words. "That's wonderful, sweetheart," I told her gently. "Tell me all about it." She rattled off details about classes and friends in a way that sounded forced. It broke my heart, not because she didn't mean it, but because I knew she'd been pushed into it. When she finished, I lowered my voice. "Emma," I said softly, "you don't have to do this if you don't want to." There was a pause, then a whisper so small I almost missed it. "Dad said you might stop being our grandma if we don't try harder." My stomach clenched. Those two had even dragged the children into their scheme, scaring them into thinking my love was conditional. "Emma, listen to me carefully," I said, steady but firm. "I will always be your grandmother. Nothing will ever change that. Not money, not houses, not your parents' choices. You understand?" "Yes, Grandma," she murmured, her voice suddenly more natural. "I love you." "I love you too, sweetheart." When I hung up, the sadness I felt quickly hardened into fury. Emily and David weren't just trying to win me back. They were staging a performance, carefully rehearsed, designed to make me look unreasonable if I refused them. By the 5th day, another letter arrived, this time in Luke's handwriting. 12 years old, his words neat and unnatural. "Dear Grandma, I think you're awesome and I love you more than anything. Please don't be mad at Mom and Dad." I pressed the letter to my chest, my heart breaking for the boy, but I knew those words weren't his. They were his parents', wearing his little hands like a glove. It was clear now. Emily and David weren't done fighting for the house. They were just switching tactics, from anger to manipulation, from threats to fake affection. But what they didn't know was this. I'd seen too much, endured too much, and given too much to fall for their act, and their play acting was nothing compared to the scheme I was about to uncover. It was a Tuesday afternoon when the whispers reached me. I had gone to my weekly bridge game at the community center, something I still kept up to feel normal, to feel connected. The women there were kind, if a little too fond of gossip. Normally, I kept myself out of it. But that day, the gossip had my name on it. My friend Evelyn, no, not the kind of Evelyn you'd imagine. This Evelyn was sharp as a tack and never afraid to repeat what she'd heard, leaned toward me across the table. "Judith," she said in that careful voice people use when they're trying to warn you without embarrassing you. "I thought you should know. Your daughter's been talking." I set down my cards. "Talking about what?" She hesitated, glancing at the others, then leaned closer. "About you. She told the ladies at church that you've been acting unstable, forgetting things, making impulsive financial decisions. She even said she's worried about your mental state for a moment." My ears rang. Unstable, impulsive, mental state. Those weren't idle words. Those were legal words. The kind whispered in offices when families tried to take control of an elder's assets. I steadied my voice. "Are you certain?" Evelyn nodded grimly. "I've known you 30 years, Judith." I've never seen a woman more in control of her mind, but Emily was very convincing. She had half the room nodding along. My hands shook under the table, but I forced them still. Of course, the flowers, the phone calls, the sudden interest in my health, it wasn't affection, it was evidence. They were building a case. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen, the roses Emily had sent wilting in their vase. Every petal looked like a lie, drooping under its own weight. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Evelyn's words: unstable, impulsive, mental state. By morning, I couldn't take it anymore. I called James, my lawyer. He answered on the second ring, his calm voice as steady as always. "James," I said, "I need the truth. Has anyone contacted you about my mental capacity?" There was a long silence, then a sigh. "Judith, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but yes. David called last week. He asked what the process would be to have you evaluated for competency." The blood drained from my face. "And what did you tell him?" "That you're perfectly competent, of course. That any evaluation would be a waste of time and money. But the fact that he asked..." James trailed off. I closed my eyes, gripping the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. So it was true. While they sent me roses and love notes, they were sharpening their knives behind my back. "They're not trying to win me back," I whispered. "They're trying to build a case against me." "Judith," James said gently, "be careful. If they push this, it could get messy." But messy was the least of my concerns. Because if Emily and David thought they could strip me of my mind as easily as they tried to strip me of my house, they had forgotten one thing. I had been underestimated before, and I had survived worse. That night, as I sat in Robert's old chair staring at the wilting roses, a cold fury settled into me. Not fear, not sadness, fury. They wanted a fight? Fine. But they had no idea who they were fighting. After that call with James, I couldn't sit still. I walked the length of my house, back and forth, my footsteps echoing off the hardwood like a drumbeat. Emily and David weren't just ungrateful. They were predators, and predators don't stop until they've taken everything. By the next morning, I was in James's office. He greeted me with his usual calm professionalism, but I could see concern flicker in his eyes. "Judith," he said gently, "I didn't want to worry you. But I'm glad you came in." I sat down, my hands folded in my lap. "Tell me everything," I demanded. James leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "David called last week. He asked how guardianship proceedings work, specifically how one might establish that a family member is making irrational financial choices. He didn't use your name at first, but it was obvious who he was referring to." My stomach clenched. "Guardianship?" I repeated, the word bitter in my mouth. So they're not just trying to take the house. They want everything. James nodded solemnly. If they succeed, Judith, they could take control of your accounts, your investments, even your medical decisions. You'd be a guest in your own life. The thought made my skin crawl. To be stripped of my independence, to have my daughter and her husband signing checks in my name? No, I wouldn't let it happen. What do we do? I asked. We fight preemptively, James said firmly. The best defense is documentation. I recommend you schedule a full mental competency evaluation with a certified neuropsychologist. That way, if they ever attempt to claim otherwise, you'll have proof on paper that you are of sound mind. I nodded slowly. It was humiliating in a way to even consider. I was 71, not senile. I handled my bills, my home, my life without assistance. But humiliation was better than vulnerability. Do it, I said. Book the evaluation. James scribbled a note. I'll arrange it for next week. In the meantime, Judith, be cautious. Anything you do, any emotional reaction, any rash decision, they could use against you. Keep your head clear. I almost laughed. Clearer than it's been in years, James. We talked about other precautions too. Financial accounts, power of attorney, restructuring my estate. The more we discussed, the more a plan began to take shape in my mind. For years, I had allowed Emily and David to dictate the terms of our relationship, to drain me dry with their needs and demands. But not anymore. When I left his office, I walked down the busy Manhattan street with a new steadiness in my step. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't the vulnerable widow or the forgotten mother. I was the one taking action. That evening, as I sat in my kitchen sipping tea, the phone buzzed again. This time, David's voice left a message dripping with fake concern. Judith, it's David. We're worried about you. You've been making decisions that just don't make sense. Let us help you. We love you. I replayed the message twice, studying the tone. It wasn't love. It was strategy. He was already laying the groundwork, creating a trail of concerned family messages he could later parade in front of a judge. But here's what he didn't know. I had already started my own trail. I had my lawyer. Soon I'd have medical proof. And soon after that, I would have something even stronger, evidence. Because if Emily and David thought they could outmaneuver me, they were about to learn that age does not mean weakness. It means experience. And I had far more of it than they did. James was right. If Emily and David wanted a war, I needed more than anger. I needed evidence. And if they thought I'd sit quietly while they schemed, they'd forgotten who raised them. The very next morning, I made 2 important phone calls. The first was to confirm Anis's appointment with a respected neuropsychologist in Manhattan. I wanted a full mental competency evaluation, signed, sealed, and beyond question. Judith, the doctor said over the phone, you sound perfectly fine to me already, but we'll make it official. That was exactly what I needed. Documentation no court could argue with. The second call was to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, Patricia Chen, a private investigator James once recommended when Robert had business disputes. Patricia was discreet, sharp, and utterly fearless. When she picked up, her voice was brisk. Mrs. Turner, it's been a long time. What can I do for you? I need to know everything about my daughter and son-in-law's finances, I said, my voice steady. Bank accounts, debts, spending patterns, and if they've been speaking with lawyers, especially about guardianship. Patricia didn't hesitate. Understood. Give me 3 days. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my chair, the weight of years of passivity lifting off my shoulders. For so long I had been reactive, waiting, hoping, giving. Now, for the first time, I was proactive. That evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and called Emily. "Mom!" she exclaimed, her voice bright. Too bright. "We've been so worried." "Why haven't you called back?" "I've been doing a lot of thinking," I said calmly. "And I believe you're right. About us, about family. I don't want to fight anymore." There was a beat of silence, and I could almost hear her brain scrambling to process the sudden shift. That's wonderful, Mom. David will be so relieved. Maybe we could have dinner, all of us together, this Friday. Yes, I said, letting a smile creep into my voice. Dinner sounds perfect. When I ended the call, I laughed quietly to myself. They thought I was surrendering. They thought their little play had worked, that the flowers, the coached phone calls, the sugar-sweet voicemails had broken me down. But they didn't realize I had just set the bait. Friday night, they would smile, toast, and pretend to love me. And I would smile back, letting them think the trap had closed around me. But in truth, the trap was mine. And when Patricia's report landed on my desk, I suspected it would give me everything I needed to spring it. Patricia didn't waste time. By Thursday morning, an envelope slid through my mail slot with her crisp handwriting on the front. Confidential. My hands trembled as I carried it to the kitchen table. I poured myself a cup of coffee, sat down, and opened the packet with the care of someone disarming a bomb. The first page laid it all out, line by line, month by month. Emily and David weren't just living comfortably on my generosity. They were drowning. Their credit card debt was staggering, spread across 6 accounts, all maxed out. The mortgage I'd once helped secure was now months behind. David had taken out a personal loan without telling Emily, and Emily had racked up store credit at boutiques I'd never even heard of. But the most damning piece of evidence came on page 7, a separate bank account, one I had never known about. Patricia had highlighted the activity in yellow. Every month, the pattern was the same. Money transferred in, large sums, and then immediately siphoned out. The amounts matched almost exactly with what I had been providing for their bills and emergencies. They hadn't just been leaning on me, they had been laundering my money through a hidden account, trying to make it look like their own income. My stomach turned as I flipped to the next section. There it was, copies of emails between David and a law firm. They'd been in consultation for months, exploring how to establish guardianship. Words like mental decline, erratic spending, and unfit to manage finances leapt off the page. I pressed my hand to my chest, my pulse racing. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment reaction to losing the deed. This was a long-term plan, a carefully orchestrated trap. They had been preparing to strip me of everything since Robert's funeral, when I was at my weakest. I thought of Emily as a little girl, clinging to my hand on the first day of school. I thought of the nights I stayed up sewing costumes for her recitals, the hours I spent tutoring her through algebra she claimed she'd never understand. That child, the one who once kissed my cheek and whispered, "I love you, Mommy." Where had she gone? The answer was bitter and clear. She'd grown into someone who valued power over love, inheritance over relationship, and David had only fueled it, whispering poison into her ear until she could no longer tell the difference between a mother's care and a bank's transaction. I closed the folder and sat in silence for a long time. Grief pressed down on me, heavy as lead, but beneath it something else burned brighter. Fury. They thought they were clever. They thought age made me blind, fragile, easy to manipulate. But they'd forgotten the most important lesson of all. I was the one who taught Emily how to play games in the first place, and I was still better at it. Friday's dinner would not be a reconciliation. It would be a reckoning. When I walked into that house, I wouldn't be their vulnerable mother, desperate for love. I would be their judge, jury, and executioner, with the evidence to prove it. Friday evening, I drove to Emily and David's house with Patricia's report tucked neatly into my handbag. The folder felt heavier than stone, but it gave me strength. Every page was a shield, every highlighted line a weapon. When I arrived, the house was lit up like a stage. Candles flickered in the dining room windows, and through the glass I could see the table set with their best china. It was clear they were putting on a performance, and I was their intended audience. Emily greeted me at the door, her smile wide but brittle. "Mom, you look wonderful," she gushed, pulling me into a hug that felt stiff, rehearsed. She wore pearls I'd bought her for her 30th birthday, as if parading them might soften me. David was right behind her, wine glass in hand, wearing the same forced smile. "Judith," he said warmly, "so glad you came. We've missed you." His tone was honey, but his eyes darted, calculating. Inside, the children were already seated. Emma looked genuinely pleased to see me, her smile small but real. Luke waved shyly, his cheeks pink. My heart softened for them, though I knew they'd been coached for this scene. Dinner began like a script. Emily asked about my health, twice. David complimented my dress, though it was the same black one I'd worn to Robert's funeral, the very one Emily had once said made me look too somber. They laughed at every small joke I made, nodded with exaggerated enthusiasm at my stories, and refilled my glass before it was half empty. It was almost impressive the way they performed. Almost. As I watched them, I thought back to my years of teaching Emily good manners. Say thank you, make eye contact, listen when people talk. She was using every lesson now, not out of love, but out of desperation. Halfway through the main course, David raised his glass. "To family," he said smoothly, "to forgiveness, and to Mom, for being the most generous, loving woman we know." The children echoed, "To Grandma." Their voices were sweet, untainted, and for a moment my heart ached for them. They didn't deserve the fallout that was coming. I clinked my glass gently, but said nothing. Instead, I watched the way David's eyes flicked toward me, searching for signs of surrender, of guilt, of weakness. After dessert, a perfectly plated lemon tart Emily had no doubt bought from a bakery, but claimed she'd made herself. I pushed back my chair. My hands rested lightly on the tablecloth, steady and calm. "I have something I'd like to say," I announced. Emily leaned forward eagerly, her face glowing with anticipation. David's smile widened, his knuckles white around his wine glass. They were expecting tears, an apology, maybe even a promise to restore what I'd taken. But what they got was something very different. I reached into my handbag and placed Patricia's thick report on the table with a soft thud. The sound silenced the room instantly. Emma's fork clattered onto her plate. Luke's eyes widened. Emily's smile froze, and David's face drained of color. "Before we toast to forgiveness," I said slowly, my voice sharp enough to cut glass, "let's toast to the truth." I slid the folder closer to them. Page 7 should interest you most. That's where Patricia documented the secret bank account you've been funneling my money into. And the emails, those are especially enlightening. Your little consultations with lawyers about my so-called mental decline. The air in the room went still, heavy. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. David swallowed hard, his confident mask cracking. I folded my hands, my gaze steady. "You invited me here for a performance." "But this," I tapped the folder, "this is the real script, and I've read every line." The silence that followed was more satisfying than any toast, because for the first time in years, I wasn't the audience. I was the director, and the next act would be mine. Here's Section 12, The Revelation, keeping the same intense, first-person YouTube storytelling style. Section 12, The Revelation. The room hung in silence, the air so thick you could slice it with a knife. Emily's face had gone pale, her lips trembling like she'd forgotten how to form words. David's hand clenched so tightly around his wine glass I thought it might shatter in his grip. The children sat frozen, their wide eyes darting between us, sensing something monumental was happening, though they didn't yet understand. I kept my voice calm, even, almost gentle. "You've been busy, haven't you?" Flowers, phone calls, handwritten letters from the children. At first, I thought it was desperate affection, but now I see it clearly for what it is, exhibits. You weren't trying to love me. You were building a case Emily finally found her voice. Mom, it's not like that. Oh, it's exactly like that, I interrupted, sliding another document onto the table. This one was thinner, stamped with the official seal of the neuropsychologist's office. While you were weaving your little story about me being unstable, I went ahead and scheduled a full mental competency evaluation. The results? Flawless. I am of sound mind. Every test, every measure clean as a whistle. So if you ever try to drag me into court, this is what the judge will see. I pushed the report toward them. Emily flinched like it was poisonous. David's face turned an ugly shade of red. You had no right digging into our finances. You had no right? I cut him off with a cold laugh. No right? After funneling nearly $500,000 of my money through a secret account to make it look like your income? After consulting with lawyers about taking control of my assets, my home, my life, you lost your right to claim family when you started plotting theft. David opened his mouth again, but Emily reached out and gripped his wrist, silencing him. Her eyes were brimming now, not with remorse, but with fear. Mom, please. Think about the children. We didn't mean... The children? I turned my gaze to Emma and Luke, softening for the first time that night. They're the only innocents at this table. Dragging them into your charade, forcing Emma to call me, making Luke write those letters. That was the cruelest betrayal of all. You didn't just lie to me. You taught them to lie for you. Emma's chin trembled, and Luke looked down at his plate. My heart ached for them, but I couldn't let pity derail me. I straightened, letting my voice harden again. Here's the truth you've both avoided saying out loud. You don't see me as a mother. You see me as a wallet, an old woman to drain until she drops. But let me assure you, this old woman isn't dropping anytime soon, and when I do, it won't be into your greedy hands. Emily's face crumpled. Mom, please, don't say that. We can change. We'll do better, I promise. I shook my head slowly. Change? You had years to change. You had Mother's Day of all days to simply pick up the phone and say, I love you, and instead you told me you were celebrating with real family. I let that hang in the air, the words slicing deeper than any evidence ever could. Then I leaned forward, my eyes locked on theirs. Well, here's the revelation you didn't expect. The real family in this story isn't you. Not anymore. I stood, gathering the folder and the evaluation back into my handbag. Enjoy your dinner, I said coolly. It'll be the last one I ever share with you in this house. Or any house. And with that, I walked out, leaving them staring at their plates, their perfect performance shattered. But the true reckoning was still to come, because exposing their lies was only the first step. Taking everything back, that would be the finale. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my armchair until dawn, the city lights fading into morning haze, Patricia's report still heavy in my bag beside me. My mind replayed every look on Emily's face, every crack in David's voice, every flicker of fear when I laid the truth bare at the dinner table. For years they had underestimated me. For years I let them. But that time was over. The next day I called James. I want everything finalized, I told him. Everything? Yes. I want them off the deed permanently, without loopholes, and I want my will rewritten. They inherit nothing. Not a cent, not a stone, not a memory. It all goes elsewhere. James didn't even hesitate. Understood. We'll move swiftly. By Monday, I invited Emily and David to my house, not for reconciliation, but for clarity. When they arrived, their expressions were strange mixtures of hope and dread. Emily clutched her purse like a lifeline. David's jaw worked as though he were chewing on words he couldn't swallow. I gestured for them to sit. This won't take long. David leaned forward. Judith, listen. We know we've made mistakes, but this is family. Surely you don't want to destroy your own bloodline over a misunderstanding. A misunderstanding? I let out a dry laugh. You call planning to strip me of my independence a misunderstanding? You call dragging your own children into your lies a mistake? I shook my head. No, this isn't a misunderstanding. It's a betrayal. Emily's eyes filled with tears. Mom, please don't do this. The kids, they need stability. If you take everything away, we'll lose the house, the school, everything we've built. I stood, walking slowly to my desk. From the top drawer, I pulled a new folder and set it on the coffee table between us. Everything you've built, I said firmly, was built on my back. My sacrifices, my money, my generosity, and generosity requires gratitude, not entitlement. They stared at the folder as if it were a weapon. In truth, it was. Inside were the papers James had drawn up, the revised deed, the updated will, the competency evaluation, and Patricia's evidence. Together, they were my armor and my sword. You have 30 days, I said. Emily blinked. 30 days for what? To prove you can survive without me. 30 days to move out of the house I bought, to find work, to pay your own bills. 30 days to live like adults instead of parasites. David's face darkened. You can't be serious. I'm deadly serious, I replied. If you don't comply, I file charges. Fraud, elder abuse, attempted guardianship under false pretenses. James assures me we have more than enough evidence to bury you both in court. The color drained from Emily's face. Mom, she whispered, her voice cracking. I softened only slightly as I looked at her. The daughter I once rocked to sleep, the child who once made me handmade cards on Mother's Day. You had every chance to choose love. Instead, you chose greed. Now you'll live with the consequences. David slammed his palm against the table. You're being cruel. I leaned down, my voice cold as steel. No, I'm being fair. Cruelty is telling your mother she isn't real family. Cruelty is plotting to declare her incompetent while smiling to her face. Cruelty is using your children as pawns. This, I tapped the folder. This is justice. The silence stretched until finally Emily sobbed into her hands. David stood, muttering under his breath, You'll regret this. I straightened my shoulders. The only thing I regret is not doing it sooner. They left my house in a storm of anger and humiliation, the slam of the front door echoing like a gavel. For the first time in decades, I felt powerful. But I also knew this was only the beginning of their downfall. News travels fast in a community like ours. By the end of the week, whispers had spread farther than I could have imagined. At the grocery store, I caught women from my church lowering their voices when I walked by. At the post office, the clerk who had known me for 20 years leaned across the counter and murmured, Judith, I heard about Emily and David. Good for you. About time someone stood up to them. It wasn't just gossip anymore. It was judgment. And for once, the judgment wasn't aimed at me. Neighbors who once praised Emily for her picture-perfect family life now shook their heads behind her back. Friends who had envied her designer handbags and expensive vacations now whispered about the debt Patricia had uncovered. The story of what they'd done, what they'd planned, spread like wildfire. People don't forget phrases like elder abuse and fraudulent guardianship. At church that Sunday, Emily didn't even show up. She couldn't bear the looks, the murmurs, the sudden shift in how people saw her. David did, though, stiff-backed and stone-faced, but even he wilted under the stares. For once, he wasn't the charming son-in-law or the successful provider. He was the man who tried to strip his wife's mother of her independence. But the most heartbreaking part of the fallout came from Emma and Luke. Emma called me one evening, her voice trembling. Grandma, everyone at school is talking. They say Mom and Dad are in trouble. Is it true? I took a deep breath, steadying myself. Sweetheart, none of this is your fault. And no matter what happens between me and your parents, I will always be your grandmother. That will never change. She sniffled. I wish they hadn't dragged us into it. I didn't want to lie to you. My heart cracked, but I kept my voice soft. I know, darling. And I don't blame you. You were only trying to please them. You don't have to do that anymore. Luke got on the phone next, his voice small. Grandma, are you mad at us? Never, I said firmly. I love you both more than anything. This isn't your burden to carry. It's theirs. In that moment, I realized the greatest gift I could give those children wasn't money or houses. It was the truth. The truth that love isn't measured in what you can take, but in what you give freely, without strings. Meanwhile, Emily and David's carefully constructed life began to unravel. Without my support, bills piled up quickly. They sold one of their cars within weeks. Emily stopped posting glamorous photos online. Instead, her account went quiet, as though silence could erase the truth. David, proud man that he was, applied for jobs well beneath his supposed status. I heard from a neighbor he'd even started working nights to keep the lights on. Emily, for the first time in her adult life, had to consider the unthinkable, working herself. Every humiliation they endured was a consequence of their choices, not mine. I hadn't destroyed them. They had destroyed themselves with greed and arrogance. And as I watched from the quiet comfort of my own home, I didn't feel triumphant so much as free. Free of obligation, free of manipulation, free of the endless cycle of giving and being drained. Still, there was one last thing to do. One final act to ensure my legacy would never again be tainted by entitlement. And for that, I would need James's help one more time. A week after Emily and David stormed out of my house, I found myself back in James's office. The city hummed outside the window, but inside his oak-paneled room, everything was steady, solid. James adjusted his glasses and looked at me with that same calm professionalism he'd shown me for decades. "Judith," he said, "are you certain about this?" "Once we finalize it, there's no going back." "I've never been more certain," I replied. My voice didn't shake, not even a little. We spent the next 2 hours combing through paperwork. The deed was officially mine again, free of their names, clean as the day Robert and I first signed it. My will was rewritten in its entirety. Emily and David cut out completely. Not a cent, not a spoon, not a memory of mine could they claim. Instead, the estate would go to charity and to a scholarship fund in Robert's name. A piece of it was set aside for Emma and Luke to be held in trust until they were old enough to manage it themselves, safe from their parents' hands. When James slid the final document across the table, I signed it with a steady hand. I thought I'd feel grief or guilt or hesitation, but all I felt was release. Walking out of his office, the sun hit my face, warm and gentle. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying the weight of their demands, their expectations, their endless greed. I was carrying only myself. That night, I returned home to my quiet house. I cooked myself a simple dinner, roast chicken with rosemary, Robert's favorite. I poured a glass of wine, set the table for one, and for once, it didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. After dinner, I wandered through each room, running my hand along the walls, the photographs, the furniture. This house wasn't just a building. It was my history, my sanctuary, my proof that love and hard work had built something enduring. And now, it was safe again. I settled into Robert's old chair with my wine, staring out at the city lights beyond the window. For years, I had been afraid of being alone. But now, I realized what I'd been living with wasn't family. It was a hollow performance of family, stripped of respect. Better to be alone with my dignity intact than surrounded by people who treated me like an ATM. I raised my glass toward the empty room, whispering into the quiet. To peace, to freedom, to Robert, for teaching me to be strong, even when I didn't want to be. And for the first time in decades, I slept deeply, without fear, without regret. Because respect cannot be bought. It must be earned, and mine was no longer for sale. So here I am, telling you this story not for pity, but for perspective. I sat alone on Mother's Day, wondering if my daughter would remember me. Instead, she told me she was with her real family. And that was the moment I finally realized I didn't need their approval to matter. For years, I thought love meant giving until you were empty. I thought if I wrote enough checks, attended enough events, and swallowed enough hurt, they would love me back. But love isn't bought. Respect isn't owed. And family isn't defined by blood. It's defined by how you're treated when the money runs out. When Emily and David betrayed me, they thought they were clever. They thought they could plot behind my back, paint me as unstable, and seize everything Robert and I built. But what they didn't count on was that I still had strength left. Strength to fight. Strength to protect myself. Strength to say, enough. Now, my estate is secure. My house is mine again. My will reflects my values, not their greed. And my grandchildren know the truth, that my love for them is unconditional, even if their parents tried to weaponize it. If you've ever felt taken for granted, if you've ever wondered if your sacrifices meant anything, hear me now. You are worth more than the people who use you. You deserve respect, not just need. And if someone shows you who they really are, believe them the first time. Thank you for listening to my story. And before I go, let me ask you, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments. And if my story reached you, don't forget to like and subscribe, because your voice matters too.